London, 1845. The black-bordered invitations to the late Duke of Horotsfield's memorial service had scarcely been distributed when the whispers began. Lady Winifred Zephyr, the newly widowed Duchess of Horotsfield, stood rigid as marble in her drawing-room, the Morning Gazette crushed in her trembling hand. "Your Grace?" Her lady's maid, Martha, hovered anxiously at the threshold. "Shall I bring your tea?" Winifred's gaze remained fixed on the society column. "They dare suggest," her voice faltered. "They insinuate that I am somehow relieved by my husband's passing." Martha crossed the room swiftly, taking the paper from her mistress's hand. "The vultures," she muttered, scanning the offending paragraph. "Not even a fortnight since his Grace's passing." The word swam before Winifred's eyes. Phrases like the young Duchess, barely 30 and fortuitously timed inheritance and worst of all, one wonders if tears shed are of grief or liberation, seemed to burn into her consciousness. "They think I wished him dead," Winifred whispered, her composure finally cracking. "After 5 years of marriage, they think I celebrated his passing." The accusation cut deeply not because it was scandalous, but because in her most private thoughts, a small, shameful part of her had felt relief when Edmund's suffering finally ended. Their marriage had been one of convenience, arranged to salvage her family's dwindling fortunes, but she had grown to respect her husband, even if passion had never blossomed between them. "The gossips will move on to fresh scandal by week's end," Martha assured her, guiding Winifred to a chair. But Winifred knew better. Society's memory was long, especially for a woman in her position, young, wealthy, and suddenly unattached. The Duchess of Horotsfield would be watched with hawkish intensity. The memorial service loomed 3 days hence. Edmund's solicitor had informed her that several important matters regarding the estate required immediate attention, and that the late Duke's closest friend, Lord Preston Northcott, would be assisting with the affairs. Lord Northcott, a man she had met only twice during her marriage, as he had spent most recent years abroad on diplomatic missions. Edmund had spoken of him often, with genuine fondness, but Winifred remembered little beyond a tall figure with serious eyes. The cathedral bells tolled solemnly as the funeral procession wound its way through London's rain-slicked streets. Beneath her heavy black veil, Winifred observed the gathered mourners with detachment. So many had come to pay respects to a man they'd barely known in life. At the churchyard, she stood with perfect composure, accepting condolences with gracious nods, though each murmured so tragic and so young felt increasingly hollow. When the final prayers were spoken and the gathering began to disperse, she felt a presence at her side. "Your Grace," came a deep voice, tinged with genuine grief. "I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for your loss." She turned to face Lord Preston Northcott. The years abroad had weathered him, lines etching the corners of his eyes, but there was a steadiness in his gaze that provided unexpected comfort. "Lord Northcott," she acknowledged. "Edmund often spoke of your friendship." "And he of your kindness," he replied, offering his arm as they walked from the grave site. He was fortunate to have found such a devoted wife in his final years. Something in his tone, free from the insinuation she'd grown accustomed to hearing, made her glance sharply at him. "Many would dispute that characterization, my lord." "Many are fools," he stated simply. "Edmund's letters to me were filled with gratitude for your care during his illness." Winifred paused beneath the shelter of a massive oak. "You corresponded regularly?" "For 20 years, without fail," Preston nodded. "Even from the most remote diplomatic postings." A carriage approached, and Preston guided her toward it. "I've taken the liberty of arranging transport to Horotsfield House. There are matters we must discuss regarding Edmund's will and the estate's management." The ride passed in silence, each lost in private remembrance. Winifred studied Lord Northcott surreptitiously. He was perhaps 40, with features that seemed carved with purpose, not conventionally handsome, but compelling. His diplomatic training showed in his perfect posture and measured movements. At Horotsfield House, the staff had prepared a small gathering for the closest mourners. Winifred moved mechanically through her duties as hostess, acutely aware of the whispers behind fans and sidelong glances. By late afternoon, only Preston and Edmund's elderly solicitor, Mr. Finch, remained. "We should proceed to the study, Your Grace," Mr. Finch suggested, clutching his leather portfolio. "There are several pressing matters." The Duke's study remained exactly as he had left it, correspondence neatly stacked, ledgers aligned on shelves, the faint scent of tobacco lingering. Winifred took a seat beside the window rather than in Edmund's chair, while the men arranged papers on the desk. "I shall be direct, Your Grace," Mr. Finch began. His Grace's final instructions were most specific. "The bulk of the estate passes to you, naturally, but with certain conditions." Winifred stiffened. "Conditions?" Mr. Finch cleared his throat uncomfortably. The Duke was concerned about vultures, he called them. Fortune hunters who might prey upon a wealthy widow. "I see," she said coldly. "And what protection did my husband devise against these vultures?" "The estate is to be held in trust for 3 years, jointly managed by yourself and Lord Northcott as executor. After which, assuming no hasty remarriage occurs, full control passes to you." Winifred's gaze flew to Preston, who looked equally startled. "This is the first I'm hearing of this specific arrangement," he said. "I knew Edmund named me executor, but not these terms. My husband did not trust me to manage my own affairs." Winifred asked, hurt blooming beneath her indignation. Mr. Finch shifted awkwardly. "I believe his concern was for your protection, not your capability." The Duke was aware of how society treats young widows. "And my protection requires Lord Northcott's guardianship." She stood abruptly. "A man who has spent most of his life abroad and knows nothing of Horatsfield's operations." Preston rose as well. "Your Grace, I assure you, I have no desire to interfere with your life or authority. Perhaps we might discuss a more workable arrangement." Mr. Finch coughed nervously. "I fear the terms are quite explicit. Weekly meetings between you both, joint signatures on all major financial decisions, Lord Northcott's residence at Horatsfield at least 3 months of each year to oversee estate matters." "Residence here?" Winifred's voice rose. "This is preposterous." "I've been recalled to London permanently," Preston said quietly. "My diplomatic career has concluded. But I have my own residence in town. I needn't impose the terms, my lord," Mr. Finch insisted. "The East Wing was specifically designated for your use." Winifred's laugh held no humor. "So I am to be supervised like a child in my own home." "Perhaps we might continue this discussion tomorrow," Preston suggested, observing her pale face. "Today has been difficult enough." Mr. Finch gathered his papers. "Very well. But these matters cannot be delayed indefinitely. There are estate operations requiring immediate attention." When the door closed behind the solicitor, Preston turned to Winifred. "I give you my word, Your Grace, I will not intrude upon your life more than absolutely necessary." She met his gaze directly. "Did you know? Did Edmund tell you of these plans?" "No," he answered firmly. "I would have counseled him against such restrictive measures. Whatever his intentions, I believe they were protective, not punitive." "Protective," she repeated bitterly. "A cage, however gilded, is still a cage, my lord." "Then we shall find the widest interpretation of these terms," he said. "I have no desire to be your jailer." For the first time that day, Winifred felt a small easing of the tightness in her chest. "Thank you for that, at least." Spring gave way to summer, and gradually, an uneasy routine established itself at Horatsfield. Preston took up residence in the East Wing as required, but made himself scarce except for their weekly meetings regarding estate business. These meetings, initially stilted and formal, had evolved into something more collaborative as weeks passed. On a particularly fine July morning, Winifred found herself unexpectedly alone with Preston in the estate's vast library. She had been reviewing charitable accounts when he entered, apparently unaware of her presence. "Oh," he said, stopping short. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I didn't mean to disturb you." She closed her ledger. "Not at all. I was just finishing." Rather than retreating, Preston approached the table where several books on agricultural improvements lay open. You're researching crop rotation methods. The tenant farms on the north boundary are struggling, she explained. Their yields have decreased steadily over the past 3 seasons. He studied her notes with evident surprise. You're quite thorough. Did you imagine I spent my days arranging flowers and planning menus, my lord? The question emerged more sharply than intended. Preston looked up, genuine remorse crossing his features. I've offended you. I apologize. Winifred sighed. No, I'm being unfair. Edmund managed everything during our marriage. I only began learning estate operations after he became ill. And yet these notes reflect considerable expertise. He gestured to her careful diagrams. Edmund never mentioned your interest in estate management. Edmund and I. She hesitated. Our marriage was not one of confidences. Understanding flickered in Preston's eyes. An arrangement, he said quietly. My father lost everything at the gaming tables, she admitted. Edmund needed a wife of suitable background. It was mutually beneficial. Preston pulled out a chair. May I? At her nod, he seated himself across from her. Edmund was my dearest friend, but I harbored no illusions about him. He was a good man, but not always an attentive one. He was kind, Winifred said firmly. I never wanted for anything material. And yet, Preston observed gently. She met his gaze. And yet. The silence between them shifted, becoming something less adversarial. These tenant farms, Preston said eventually, tapping her notes. I've seen similar problems in the northern Italian regions. There's a method involving alternating legumes that might prove useful. They spent the next hour in surprisingly comfortable discussion of agricultural techniques. When Preston finally rose to leave, he hesitated. The Botanical Society is hosting an exhibition tomorrow at Kensington Gardens, he said. They're featuring several new specimens with agricultural applications. Perhaps you might find it informative for your research. Winifred considered. She had scarcely left the estate since Edmund's death. Is this an invitation, Lord Northcott? A suggestion between colleagues, he replied carefully. Though I would be pleased to accompany you, if you wished. She found herself nodding before fully considering the implications. Yes, I believe that would be informative. Only after he departed did she realize this would be her first public appearance with a man since becoming a widow. Society would notice. Society would talk. For the first time in months, Winifred discovered she didn't particularly care. The botanical exhibition proved unexpectedly liberating. Preston's diplomatic background provided a useful shield against society's whispers. He smoothly deflected prying questions and positioned their outing as strictly business. Several agricultural innovations did indeed catch Winifred's attention, and their discussion on the carriage ride home was animated. This tentative outing led to others: agricultural society meetings, a lecture at the Royal Institution, consultations with experts on land management. Each interaction remained scrupulously proper, focused on estate business, but Winifred found herself looking forward to these excursions with increasing anticipation. By autumn, their weekly estate meetings had expanded to include regular walks through Horace's grounds, discussions of books they'd both read, and occasional chess matches in the evenings. Preston proved to be educated but never condescending, articulate but willing to listen. He treated her opinions with genuine respect, something she'd rarely experienced from men of his station. On a crisp October afternoon, they rode out to inspect the northern tenant farms, where Preston suggested improvements were being implemented. The countryside glowed with autumn colors, and Winifred felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The miller's wheat field looks promising, she observed as they rode side by side. Their rotation plan is working. Preston nodded, his expression pleased. Your implementation has been flawless. The yield should increase by at least 20% next season. Our implementation, she corrected. I wouldn't have known about the Mediterranean methods without you. He glanced at her, a smile warming his usually serious features. We make a rather effective team, don't we? The simple observation stirred something unexpected in Winifred's chest. They did work well together, complementing each other's strengths, challenging each other's assumptions. Over months of collaboration, she'd come to value his perspective, his dry humor, his fundamental decency. As they crested a hill overlooking the estate, Winifred reined in her horse. "I owe you an apology, Lord Northcott." He stopped beside her. "Whatever for?" "I resented your presence initially. I saw you as Edmund's final attempt to control my life." She met his gaze directly. "I was wrong." "Your resentment was entirely justified," he replied. "The arrangement was presumptuous at best. And yet, you've never once overruled my decisions or asserted authority over the estate." She studied him curiously. "Why?" Preston considered his answer carefully. "Because Edmund never truly knew you," he said finally. "He described a beautiful, biddable wife who needed protection from the world. But that woman bears little resemblance to the capable, intelligent person I've come to know these past months." The honesty in his assessment left her momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, shouts erupted from the valley below. One of the tenant cottages had caught fire, flames already licking at the thatched roof. Without hesitation, they spurred their horses down the hill. The next hours passed in a blur of activity, organizing bucket lines, evacuating families, salvaging what could be saved. Winifred worked alongside tenants, her riding habit ruined with soot and water, while Preston coordinated efforts to prevent the fire from spreading to adjacent buildings. By dusk, the fire was contained, though one cottage stood in ruins. Miraculously, no lives had been lost, but the tenant family, a young couple with 3 small children, had lost everything. "They'll stay at the main house tonight," Winifred declared, wrapping a blanket around the shivering mother. "We'll begin rebuilding tomorrow." Preston, his face streaked with ash, approached with the youngest child in his arms. The little girl had fallen asleep against his shoulder, apparently unconcerned by his disheveled state. "The father has a broken arm," he reported quietly. "I've sent for the doctor." Winifred nodded, suddenly aware of how they must appear, both filthy, exhausted, utterly unlike their usual composed selves. Yet Preston's steadiness throughout the crisis, his willingness to work alongside the tenants without hesitation, revealed something essential about his character. Later, as they walked wearily back to the main house in the gathering darkness, Winifred broke the comfortable silence. "You never told me why you left the diplomatic service." Preston's stride faltered slightly. "It's not a particularly interesting story." "I doubt that," she said. "You don't strike me as a man who would abandon a successful career without reason." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. "There was a situation in Vienna. A treaty negotiation that went poorly." "Poorly how?" "I refused to support terms that would have benefited British trade interests at the expense of devastating a region's local economy." His voice remained neutral, but she sensed the tension beneath his words. "My superiors felt I had forgotten where my loyalties should lie." "You chose conscience over career," she said softly. Preston shrugged. "I chose what I could live with. The Foreign Office suggested I might be better suited to retirement than continued service." They reached the house, pausing at the point where they would separate to their respective wings. In the lantern light, Winifred studied him with new understanding. "Thank you," she said simply. "For today, and for your honesty." Something shifted in his expression, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked. "Good night, Your Grace." She watched him walk away, realizing with a start that somewhere in the past months, she had begun to care deeply what Preston Northcott thought of her. More unsettling still was the realization that she had begun to care for him. Winter descended on Horrocks with unusual ferocity. Heavy snows isolated the estate for weeks at a time, forcing Winifred and Preston into closer proximity than their usual careful routine. Evening meals, once taken separately, became shared occasions by practical necessity, as maintaining 2 dining rooms proved wasteful in the bitter cold. These dinners revealed new dimensions to their evolving relationship. Preston proved to be well-read and widely travelled, with insights on everything from Italian opera to Ottoman architecture. Winifred found herself sharing stories of her childhood, her hopes before her father's gambling had constrained her future, her secret passion for botanical illustration. On Christmas Eve, a particularly violent storm howled around Horace's stone walls. The planned celebration for the estate's children had been postponed, leaving the great house unusually quiet. Winifred sat in the library before a roaring fire, sketching plant specimens from memory, when Preston appeared at the doorway. "I thought you might appreciate some company," he said, holding up a chess set. "Unless you prefer solitude this evening." "Company would be welcome," she admitted, setting aside her sketchbook. As they arranged the chess pieces, Preston noticed her drawings. "These are extraordinary," he said, examining a detailed rendering of a rare orchid. "You have considerable talent." Winifred felt a flush of pleasure at his genuine admiration. "A frivolous pastime." "Art is never frivolous," he countered. "These could be published in a botanical journal. A duchess publishing scientific illustrations." She laughed softly. "Imagine the scandal." Preston's gaze held hers. "Perhaps the world needs more such scandals." The chess game progressed in companionable concentration, their matched skills leading to a complex middle game. As Preston contemplated a particularly difficult position, Winifred found herself studying the strong lines of his face, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. "What would you have done," she asked suddenly, "if you hadn't been forced to leave diplomatic service?" He looked up, surprised by the question. "Continued serving, I suppose. Though the constant travel was becoming less appealing as I grew older. No thoughts of settling." She moved her bishop, threatening his queen. "A diplomatic marriage to secure your position?" A smile touched his lips. "Are you asking if there was someone, Winifred?" It was the first time he had used her given name. The intimacy of it hung in the air between them. "Was there?" she asked quietly. "No." His answer was simple but carried weight. "My career left little room for attachments. And I never met anyone who made me question that choice." He moved his knight, countering her threat. "Until recently." The implication in his words sent her heart racing. Preston, a tremendous crash interrupted them as the storm tore a branch from an ancient oak, sending it crashing through one of the library windows. Glass shattered across the floor as wind and snow whirled into the room. They both leapt up, Preston pulling Winifred away from the flying glass. For a moment, she found herself pressed against him, his arms protective around her, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. Then practicality asserted itself, and they separated to deal with the emergency. Hours later, with the window temporarily sealed and the library restored to order, they stood once more at the point of separation, that invisible boundary between his domain and hers. "Thank you for your assistance tonight," Winifred said formally, though formality felt increasingly artificial between them. Preston nodded, hesitated, then spoke carefully. "May I ask you something rather personal?" "Yes," she answered, perhaps too quickly. "Were you ever happy with Edmund?" The question was gentle, without judgment. Winifred considered her answer. "Content, perhaps, but not happy. Not in the way I think you mean." "And now?" His voice had lowered, intimate in the shadowed hallway. "Now I find myself experiencing unexpected emotions," she admitted. "Emotions that both frighten and exhilarate me." Preston took a step closer. "Winifred, the grandfather clock struck midnight, startling them both. Christmas Day had begun. "I should retire," she said reluctantly. "Tomorrow will be busy with the rescheduled celebrations." He nodded, though something unresolved lingered in his eyes. "Merry Christmas, Winifred." "Merry Christmas, Preston." As she ascended the stairs, Winifred acknowledged the truth she could no longer deny: she was falling in love with Preston Northcott. And nothing in their complicated situation made such feelings appropriate or wise. January brought a thaw in the weather but a new frost between Winifred and Preston. The almost moment in the library on Christmas Eve had created a self-conscious awareness that made their easy companionship suddenly awkward. Their weekly estate meetings became strictly business, their dinners increasingly occupied with safe, impersonal topics. The situation might have continued indefinitely had Lady Hortense Pembroke not arrived unannounced one dreary February afternoon. A distant cousin of Edmund's and a notorious gossip, Lady Pembroke had invited herself to stay at Horrocks to keep poor dear Winifred company in her isolation. Within hours of her arrival, Winifred understood the true purpose of the visit. Lady Pembroke had come to investigate rumours circulating in London about the widow and her husband's executor. Such an unusual arrangement, Lady Pembroke remarked over tea, her sharp eyes missing nothing. A bachelor gentleman residing in the same house as a young widow. Edmund always did have unconventional ideas. Lord Northcott occupies an entirely separate wing, Winifred replied coolly. The arrangement is purely practical for estate management. Of course, of course. Lady Pembroke's smile didn't reach her eyes. Though you must know people talk. Why, just last week at Lady Harrington's musical evening, your name was mentioned most particularly. I can imagine, Winifred said dryly. They say you're often seen together in London, exhibitions, lectures, all manner of outings. Lady Pembroke leaned forward conspiratorially. Some wonder if poor Edmund's body was even cold before certain arrangements were made. Winifred set down her teacup with deliberate care. What precisely are you insinuating, Lady Pembroke? Merely repeating what's being said, my dear. Her false concern was infuriating. As family, I felt I should warn you. A young widow must be particularly careful of her reputation. How thoughtful. Winifred's tone could have frosted the windows. But entirely unnecessary. Lord Northcott and I maintain a professional relationship, nothing more. Lady Pembroke's arched eyebrow spoke volumes. If you say so, my dear. Though I must say, when I observed you together at dinner yesterday, there seemed a certain awareness between you. Most improper, considering your continued mourning. Winifred stood, her patience exhausted. I think I shall rest before dinner. The weather has given me a headache. She fled to her private sitting room, anger and humiliation burning in her chest. Was this how society viewed their situation? Had her reputation already been compromised beyond repair? A soft knock interrupted her distress. Martha entered, carrying a note. From Lord Northcott, Your Grace. He asked that I deliver it personally. Winifred broke the seal with trembling fingers. May I request a private word regarding estate matters? The blue drawing room in 1 hour, if convenient. The formal tone provided no hint of his purpose, but Winifred suspected it concerned Lady Pembroke's presence. She sent a brief affirmative reply and spent the next hour alternately pacing and staring out the window at the rain-swept gardens. When she entered the blue drawing room, Preston was standing by the fireplace, tension evident in his posture. Lady Pembroke has been sharing London gossip, he said without preamble. Winifred's laugh held no humour. With me as well. Apparently, we are the scandal of the season. I feared this might happen. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. My presence here has compromised your reputation. Our association has, she corrected. The estate meetings, the outings to London, all perfectly innocent, yet fodder for malicious interpretation. Preston crossed to the window, his back to her. I've received a letter from the Foreign Office, he said after a moment. They've offered me a position in Cairo. Apparently, my particular expertise is needed again. Winifred felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. You're leaving? I'm considering it, he said carefully. It would solve several problems at once. Problems, she repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. Is that what I am to you? A problem to be solved? He turned to face her, his expression pained. You know that's not true. Do I? Winifred advanced on him, months of suppressed emotion breaking through her careful restraint. What am I to know? Preston, when you've been so scrupulously proper these past weeks? Barely meeting my eyes at dinner, excusing yourself from any room I enter, because I cannot trust myself." The words burst from him with unexpected force. "Because every moment in your presence tests my resolve to honor my promise to Edmund, to respect your position, to what?" she pressed, standing before him now. Preston's voice lowered. "To not fall in love with my friend's widow." The confession hung in the air between them, impossible to retract. "And yet you did," she said softly. "Yes." The single syllable contained volumes of restrained emotion. "God help me, I did." Winifred moved closer still, close enough to see the conflict in his eyes. "And is running away to Cairo your solution?" "It would protect your reputation," he said. "Allow the gossip to die naturally." "My reputation," she repeated. "Always my reputation. First Edmund sought to protect it with his controlling will, now you with your noble sacrifice." Her composure finally broke entirely. "Has it occurred to either of you that I might wish to determine my own fate?" "Winifred, no," she interrupted. "You don't get to make this decision alone. Not when I have spent months falling in love with you as well." Preston went still, disbelief and hope warring in his expression. "You can't mean that." "I have never meant anything more," she said fiercely. "I love you, Preston. Not as a convenient solution to widowhood, not as an escape from loneliness, but for your mind, your principles, your heart." He reached for her then, his hands framing her face with exquisite tenderness. "If I stay," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "the gossip will only worsen." "Then let it," Winifred replied. "I would rather face scandal with you than respectability without you." When his lips finally met hers, the kiss held all the restrained passion of months of denial. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as her hand slid into his hair. Years of propriety dissolved in the heat of their embrace, leaving only the essential truth they'd been avoiding: they belonged together. A shocked gasp from the doorway shattered the moment. They turned to find Lady Pembroke standing there, her expression a perfect mixture of horror and delight at having her suspicions so dramatically confirmed. "Well," she said, already backing toward the door, "I see I was not misinformed after all." As the door closed behind her, Preston and Winifred stood frozen for a beat before dissolving into unexpected laughter. "She'll be halfway to London with this story before dinner," Winifred said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "Then the damage is done," Preston replied, taking her hands in his. "But I find I cannot regret it." Winifred sobered. "What happens now?" "She'll ensure every drawing room in London knows of our impropriety by tomorrow. Now," Preston said decisively, "we take control of the narrative." Society pages, March 1846, *, the announcement of the engagement between Lady Winifred Zephyr, Duchess of Horotsfield, and Lord Preston Northcott has caused quite the stir in London circles. While some whisper about the propriety of such a match so soon after the late Duke's passing, those closest to the situation note that the arrangement fulfills the explicit wishes of the Duke himself, who entrusted his dearest friend with both his estate and, it seems, his wife's future happiness. The marriage is set for June, when the Duchess's official mourning period concludes. On a perfect summer day, Winifred stood before the mirror in her dressing room, examining her reflection. The wedding gown was not black, as convention might have dictated for a widow remarrying, but a soft pearl grey that complemented her coloring and made a statement about beginnings rather than continued mourning. "You look beautiful," Martha said, adjusting the delicate veil. "His lordship won't know what hit him." Winifred smiled. "Is it terribly improper to be this happy? After what you've both endured?" "I'd say you've earned it." Martha stepped back to assess the final effect. "The guests are arriving. Are you ready?" The small chapel at Horotsfield had been decorated with wildflowers from the estate. Only a select group had been invited, those who had supported their unconventional courtship rather than condemned it. As Winifred walked down the aisle alone, her eyes found Preston waiting for her, his expression one of undisguised adoration. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows exchanged with the quiet confidence of two people who had chosen each other with clear eyes and full hearts. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Preston's kiss held promise rather than possession. At the wedding breakfast, toasts were offered to the couple's happiness. When Preston rose to speak, his eyes found Winifred's across the table. "They say that the truest love stories often have the most unexpected beginnings," he said. "Ours certainly qualifies. What began as an obligation has become the greatest gift of my life." He raised his glass. "To my wife, who taught me that doing what is right and doing what makes us happy can sometimes be the same thing." Later, as they walked through Horatsfield's gardens, now Preston's home by choice rather than duty, Winifred leaned against his shoulder. "What do you think Edmund would say if he could see us now?" she asked. Preston considered this thoughtfully. "I think he would be pleased. Not because his plan worked exactly as intended, it certainly didn't, but because in the end, two people he cared for found happiness together." "I like to think so too," Winifred said. "Though I doubt he anticipated quite this outcome when he wrote that will." "The best laid plans," Preston murmured, drawing her closer. "Indeed." She smiled up at him. "Sometimes they lead us exactly where we need to be, even if by the most unexpected path." As the summer afternoon faded to evening, the newly wedded Lord and Lady Northcott returned to the house that had witnessed their unlikely journey from reluctant collaborators to passionate partners. Society might continue to whisper, but within the walls of Horatsfield, they had created something rare and precious, a marriage of true minds and hearts, forged in grief but flourishing in joy. The widowed Duchess had indeed found unexpected passion with her late husband's friend, and in doing so, had discovered not scandal, but redemption.